Let's bring in Zeke Miller to talk more about this. Zeke is a White House reporter for the Associated Press and a CBSN political contributor. Zeke, on Friday, as you know, we saw the highest number yet of new coronavirus cases in the United States. And in an interview with CNN, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows acknowledged the country would not get the virus under control. Remember back in March, Zeke, when President surrogates, those at the White House, told you and other reporters and the rest of the world that this president was a wartime president, that this coronavirus was a battle, and that this wartime president would defeat it. The president keeps saying that we are rounding the turn. It is striking to me two things, Zeke. One, this morning on CBS This Morning, Dr. Ashish Jha was on the air, and he said this: lots of countries have controlled the coronavirus. The idea that somehow America is uniquely incapable of managing to control an infectious disease is odd. We certainly can control it, and we should. Why is the message from the president now entirely different? It went from being he was a wartime president, we were going to defeat this virus, and now it's, no, we can't control it because it's a contagious infection, it's a contagious virus just like the flu. What's going on?
You know, really, this was a case of one of the president's senior-most aides saying the quiet part out loud for months now at the White House, going back to April when we saw that the aggressive push by the president and other aides to reopen the country, that narrative taking shape. It sort of pointed to not an inability to manage the coronavirus, but an unwillingness that when the president, when his aides sort of evaluated the balance of potential lives lost and illness to hundreds of thousands of people from the coronavirus, millions of people now with confirmed infections, obviously, versus the economic cost and social cost, societal costs of the shutdown, they came down on that the societal and social costs and economic costs in particular were worse. And that judgment call was obviously colored by politics. And this is a president who is now 8 days from Election Day, and where he has made his economic performance sort of the central plank of his campaign. So he needs to sort of, at this point, he needs to be all in on the economic front, while his rival, Democrat Joe Biden, is sort of hammering him on the coronavirus day by day by day.
So what does this mean, though, for the president's campaign? He would love to talk about something else, but the virus makes its own headlines. You know, now we have the vice president's office, 5 people who work closely with the vice president, all testing positive. The vice president has been testing negative, but according to guidelines, he shouldn't be out there on the campaign trail. So, you know, it makes it really difficult for the president to pivot to any other topic that you'd like to talk about because the virus insists on being front and center.
No, that's exactly right. And Mark Meadows, in some ways, there was writing ad copy for Joe Biden's campaign when he made that admission yesterday. And when it comes to the vice president, it's sort of striking to see him continuously going to travel. They know that the handling of the coronavirus is perhaps the president's biggest vulnerability in this election, and for some reason they think it's more worthwhile for him to spend his time on the road, where where all the goodwill, all the good press coverage, all the message that he's trying to deliver about the president is going to be overshadowed by his very presence there in violation of some of those guidelines. Obviously, the vice president is an essential worker, but is campaigning really essential work? Is that worth putting others potentially in danger? And that's the question that the vice president and the president's campaign are going to have to answer 8 days before Election Day, and that's not where they want to be.
Zeke, since you've been on the air, you may have seen this, maybe you haven't. The president has been tweeting. His most recent tweet was this: the fake news media is writing COVID, COVID, COVID all the way to the election. Losers. You know, I know we say this a lot, Zeke. We say that it's unprecedented. We say that nobody's ever behaved like this who sat in the Oval Office. But the reality is new cases over the last 14 days are up 32% in this country. New deaths are up 12%. The cases across this country, highest per capita, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, Nebraska, Iowa, generally states where the president enjoys a strong popularity. He's also going and doing these rallies, and it's been proven that in some cases, those rallies have led to infections from people who've attended them. What is the White House saying about why the president continues? Forget the notion that he is angry that some states decide to implement lockdown measures because he's all about the economy. We're not economists. We're not public health officials. That's up to the president and his advisors to decide. But in this particular instance, where the president is taking his show on the road and having these events, which is a question that Jake Tapper of CNN asked Mark Meadows yesterday, what does the White House continue to say about why he would put Americans at risk just for the sake of getting out in front of them?
You know, the White House message, in short, is, you know, these are, you know, consenting adults and going along, making decisions for themselves. The challenge there is that the information that they've been getting from the people who, you know, just to make those informed decisions has been muddled in part by the president's comments that in contravention of what sort of the overwhelming body of science says about how this virus transmits, about the being in large crowds and mask wearing and things like that. And there's also the separate question of sort of the morality of convening that many people together. That is something that the president's campaign is struggling with, and that's why, you know, there's sort of been this study in contrast in terms of style and temperament, but also policy in terms of how the president has campaigned and how Joe Biden has been campaigning, and sort of the different nature of those events, which the president mocks on the campaign trail. It's sort of, you know, it sort of it writes its own copy for how this. For how how these two men who would be leaders would handle the pandemic going forward.
You know, the president and his campaign staff have often pointed out that these rallies are outdoors, and that's one of the things that the CDC says, you know, is a less of a threat. But now we have an event happening indoors. It's the confirmation of Judge Amy Coney Barrett. It's expected to happen later on this evening, and the vice president, who we know has had a number of people around him test positive, is expected to be there. Can we talk a little bit about, you know, how it looks and what we know about, you know, his health, his proximity to some of these people who tested positive, and whether or not, you know, he may be a risk?
Yeah, we know that some of the individuals who tested positive are the vice president's closest aides, his chief of staff, his body man, his chief outside political advisor. Some of them, we don't precisely know just how long the vice president was in close contact with them, but Mark Short, his chief of staff, traveled with him on Thursday and Friday, 24, 48 hours before he himself tested positive on Saturday. They were all tested on the day of the trip, but they generally did not wear masks on the plane and around each other. So it is, you know, we know the vice president was a close contact of his chief of staff, certainly, and that, you know, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that people who are close contact should should essentially should quarantine for 14 days unless they're an essential worker doing essential work, in which case they should wear a mask at all times and self-monitor and undergo testing and things like that. Obviously, you know, when it comes to presiding over a Senate vote, that is one of the few constitutional responsibilities of a vice president. But even still, his vote is not going to be necessary, almost certainly, tonight on the Senate floor. This is the sort of thing where, you know, he can monitor on C-SPAN too, like everyone else. But he wants to be there for the show of it, for the symbolism. You know, he can wear a mask. He'd probably remain distanced up on the from behind the desk at the front of the Senate chamber. But that is certainly, you know, the symbolism is sort of what speaks more to than the policy here, and that's one of the things that, again, is sort of injecting the coronavirus back into the national discourse 8 days before an election, where the president and the vice president want to talk about anything else.
Yeah, indeed. And Zeke, I think that the book behind you is Presidents of War by Michael Beschloss. I'd be interested to see what Mr. Beschloss, who's a presidential historian, has to say if he ever adds an addendum to that book about this president and this war, to use the words of his surrogates, that he was fighting. 225,000 Americans dead. The only question that I have for you, Zeke, and we'll probably ask Nancy Cortez this as well, what's the possibility of Amy Coney Barrett showing up tonight? Given that she has seen sort of the press around the first super spreader event, would she potentially attend this one?
No, I have not been tracking that particularly very closely, but we are being told over at the White House to expect some sort of event as soon as this evening, outdoors, to formally swear in Judge Barrett as Justice Barrett, as we're all assuming the direction the Senate vote is going. Obviously, the symbolism, the president's been angling for that for a week, but we know that the last outdoor event over the White House didn't turn out so well, so we may see a sort of a different flavor, maybe some more precautions at the event this evening.
Yeah.
Well, let's hope so. Zeke Miller, thank you so much.
Thank you.